The Iran-Iraq War. The Iran-Iraq War was known as the longest and most devastating war in modern Middle Eastern history. There were three main phases, including the initial invasion of Iraq, moving into Iran, the Iranian offensive, which is after Iran had expelled most if not all of the Iraqi forces. They then moved on the offensive and started fighting into Iraq. And the third and final phase is when the Iranian offensive halted and Iran was eventually forced into the ceasefire. There are several different causes for the Iran-Iraq War. Some of the main ones are the perceived weakness in Iran due to the recent Islamic Revolution. Towards the end of 1979, the Iranian Shah was forced out and he was replaced with an Islamic Republic. Or an Islamic Republic is the government that formed to replace the monarchy. But at this time it was still in its infancy and there was a lot of infighting and uprisings against it. Thus, Saddam Hussein viewed the Iranian government as weak and likely easy to topple. Another problem was when Saddam Hussein came to power in Iraq in 1987, the Shia clerics in Iraq were encouraging opposition to the newly elected regime. And one of the most outspoken clerics against the Iraqi government was Ayatollah Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. He was arrested, and while under house arrest, he still continued to urge and encourage violent opposition to Saddam and to the regime. Saddam needed a way to regain authority and credibility and to show his dominance in the region, and he viewed the weakness of Iran as a way to do this. He figured if the people were involved in a war, they would unite and he would be able to gain the support that way. And especially after Ayatollah al-Sadr was executed, he desperately needed a way to unite the country or he was going to lose it, which resulted in Phase 1 of the war, which started September of 1980 and continued until June of 1982, in which Iraq invaded with ground forces in the north, central, and southern regions of the Iran-Iraq border, and along with minor airstrikes, but those were quickly grounded. The one thing that Saddam had really not anticipated was that his attack actually served to unite Iran and ended up giving it greater power than it had prior to the war start. So the only notable success, the only significant success as far as taking territory that Iraq was able to get was in Khorramshahr, where they were able to take the area, but that was it. From September of 1980 through November of 1980, that's all the ground they were able to gain, and their progress largely stopped by November of 1980, at which point Saddam realized his mistake, offered a ceasefire, but Iran rejected it. They were furious at the attack, and the idea of yielding to Saddam without having regained their territory was not acceptable, and so the war continued. Throughout the rest of Phase 1, Saddam's forces were expelled from Iran. The Iranian forces united and became stronger and stronger, and by May of 1982, nearly all of Saddam's forces were expelled from Iranian territory, and Iran had regained all of the areas that had been lost. So that led to, on the 10th of June, Saddam ordered all of his forces withdraw from Iran, and he again offers a ceasefire to Ayatollah Khomeini, the supreme leader of Iran, who refuses to even communicate with him, refuses to even consider negotiations with Iraq. Which then takes us into Phase 2 of the war, which takes place from June of 1982 through February of 1987. Due to their recent successes, Ayatollah Khomeini and the Iranian military were very encouraged by the gains they'd been able to get, and figured that they could continue to capitalize upon that success. And they moved into Iraq, and they invaded again from the north to the south, all along the border. They moved in and attacked. And while they were not able to gain any territory for quite some time, any significant territory at least, Iraq knew that this battle was not sustainable. The population of Iran was more than triple that of Iraq, and Saddam knew that if they just continued the battlefronts along the border, that his regime, his troops would fall. And so they began to, they started the War of the Cities, which was something that was only possible due to Soviet support from the Soviet Union. And because in the early days of the war, Iraq's air force had been grounded, but recently they received reinforcements from Russia, which allowed them to expand and begin this War of the Cities, in which Iraq would launch both missile attacks and airstrikes against cities of the internal part of Iran, hoping to cripple the public support for the war and hurt the morale, which of course then led to Iran launching counteroffensives and attacking and continuing this, taking the War of the Cities into Iraq, excuse me. And as this picture shows all the areas that were struck, Iraq focused on just everywhere. They went all over within the city, within the country. Anything that they could get to, they attacked. Whereas Iran focused most of their attacks on Baghdad. And so while obviously Iran was hit in a lot more places, there were a very significant number of Iranian attacks into Iraq. They just attacked less territories. And as the Phase 2 continues, the Iranian offensive continues, Iran gets a very notable, very significant victory in that they were able to take the Al-Faw Peninsula. This is the very southernmost part of Iraq, where Iraqi territory extends into the Persian Gulf. So this is able to largely cut off their access to the Gulf, and was a debilitating blow to the Iraqi military. But during the entire 5 years of Phase 2 of this war, there was no other significant territories won or lost from either side. Which takes us into Phase 3. The war was really going nowhere. It was at a stalemate and had been for quite some time. And due to the oil prices going all over due to the instability of the region, and due to another aspect of the war that we could spend a large portion of time on, and that's the tanker war, in which Iran started attacking oil tankers. The rest of the world had had enough. For most of this war, it was pretty much just the two countries. Nobody else was largely involved. However, at this point, the U.S. becomes involved because in an attempt to secure their oil interests in the region. And so from the start, it started when Kuwait petitioned both the Soviet Union and the U.S. for support. Their tankers were getting sunk. They needed the help, or they were going to get into a very bad situation. And so the U.S. agreed to flag Kuwaiti tankers as their own, as well as provide U.S. naval escorts to them. They also extended the same courtesy to Saudi tankers. So in retaliation to this, Iran then goes and lays mines throughout the Gulf, and even in October of 1987 gained the courage, and they attacked and sunk a Kuwaiti tanker that was flagged as a U.S. ship. Of course, the U.S. retaliated to all of this. In retaliation to the laying the mines, the United States then attacked a boat that was laying mines in the Gulf and sunk it, killing 5 Iranian naval seamen. And following the attack on the Kuwaiti tanker, the U.S. then attacked and destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms within the Persian Gulf. And the American involvement also extended to political involvement in that they pushed hard for the UN to issue a new resolution calling for an end to these hostilities, which the UN then did. In July of 1987, they issued their resolution calling for an end to the hostilities, and Iraq immediately accepted it. Iran criticized it, said it was just an attempt to justify the war actions of the U.S. in the region, and they refused to accept it. But interestingly, this time they did not openly reject it either. They kind of just left it on the table for a while. In the meantime, Iraqi long-range missiles continue to strike Tehran and continue to break down the morale of the people. And during this time, Iraq manages to regain all of the territories that they have lost, including, most importantly, that Al-Faw Peninsula. Through April to June of 1988, they were able to regain everything. And so now the borders sit as they were prior to this war even starting. Both sides had used chemical weapons in these war on the cities, but in largely unpopulated areas. And so, but at this point, the Iranians are fearing that Iraq will step it up and that they will launch a chemical attack against Tehran, which is really breaking the morale of the people and breaking down the support of the Iranian people for this war. At this point, a U.S. ship in April of 1988, a U.S. naval ship ends up hitting a mine, injuring several of the seamen on board, and in retaliation, they completely take out 2 Iranian ships, severely disable another. They destroy 2 more oil platforms, and in addition, they're attacking a lot of the Revolutionary Guard's speedboats, which is just really restricting Iran's abilities here. At which point they realized that they weren't going to win. Nothing had happened in years, and it wasn't going to go anywhere. And so on the 18th of July, 1988, Iran formally accepts the ceasefire agreement issued by the UN. And so as a result of the war, this map shows where the original border was, how much Iraq gained, and then how much they lost. And so largely there wasn't a whole lot of territory that changed hands here. Despite that, estimates, there's no solid number for the number of casualties in this war, but estimates range up to 2 million as low as 1 million. Either way, that's a lot of people, a huge number of casualties that were lost during this war. And like I said, the borders not a whole lot of land changed hands to begin with, and at the end, it's right back to where it was to begin. And both sides were determined to topple each other's regimes, but were unable to do so. If anything, both sides had further credibility in the end rather than less. So these are all my the sources that I used. So the Iran-Iraq War lasted for 9 years, cost millions of lives, and largely nothing was gained from either side from it.